Hey everyone, this is the Love of Cinema podcast. We like to talk movies. If you like to talk movies too, you come to the right place.
She was resistant to having to slap Anushka or push her, or just keep having to force her that you have to do it. You read the script, we talked about it. You can't bail out at the last minute while we're standing on set. But she did a good. I think she really makes that character happen.
Hey everyone, this is Himanshu, and you're listening to the Love of Cinema podcast. Welcome back. Hope you all are doing well. Today, we'll be chatting with a man who has made three very interesting films. He's made a noir, and unique thriller, and a western. But before that, if you're a first-time listener, do check out prior episodes of the podcast. You can find all episodes on Apple, Spotify, Google, or any of the other pod apps. If you enjoy long-form, organic conversations centered around Indian cinema and streaming shows, Love of Cinema podcast was created for people just like you. So do consider subscribing. Also, please do rate and review the podcast in Apple Podcasts, as that will help others with similar taste discover this podcast. So if you like the episode, please rate and review us and help us spread the word. That would be much appreciated. Back to today's episode. Navdeep Singh's debut feature film, Manorama 6 Feet Under, is that rare Hindi film which can be classified as classic noir. It's a film which has garnered cult status over the years. Navdeep had some very interesting stories about the film, its casting, and homages in the film. For example, did you know that originally Irrfan was supposed to do Manorama? Also, did you know that there's an Easter egg reference to Terry Gilliam's Brazil in the film? And yes, we did talk about the cap with the pink curtains. How could I not ask him about that? Navdeep's second film, NH10, was a riveting thriller where a woman takes on the monster of patriarchy to save her husband. While talking about NH10, we touched upon filming violence, and Navdeep had some very insightful takes on showing violence and using violence as a storytelling tool. His latest film was Laal Kaptaan with Saif Ali Khan in the lead. It's essentially a western set in 18th century Bundelkhand, a story about a Naga sadhu seeking revenge. Brilliantly shot by Shankar Raman, who made Gurgaon, and featuring one of Saif Ali Khan's all-time best performances. I really like this film, and in my opinion, it is Navdeep's best film. I would guess this film too is going to become a cult hit with passage of time, as more discover this fine film. We talked about all three films, and Navdeep shared some terrific anecdotes. Navdeep also had some great advice for young filmmakers who are trying to get a genre film made. It involves lying. Here's our chat. Hey Navdeep, can you hear me?
Hey Himanshu, great to be here, man.
Great. Hey, thanks a lot again for talking to us. And I'm really glad we have this opportunity to chat about your films. So let's get right to it. My first question to you, Navdeep, is that one of the common threads which runs across your three films is that of a narrative conflict. Manorama and Laal Kaptaan are about conflict between two individuals.
Right.
In Manorama, we have a man taking on a political heavyweight. In Laal Kaptaan, we have a man taking on another man in seeking revenge. In NH10, we have a woman who's taking on the entire system of patriarchy.
Right.
Would that be an accurate assessment? And if yes, what is it about narrative conflict that fascinates you?
I mean, yeah, I'd say that's a fairly accurate assessment. I mean, very honestly, I haven't really thought of it that way. But yeah, it sort of makes sense. I think somebody I was talking to recently, somebody mentioned that, again, I think in a very similar sense that all three films seem to have also a very outsider perspective. Somebody who's outside of the system engaging with it. And yeah, I suppose that perspective is true as well. Uh, so I mean, particularly within the Indian context, Himanshu, I think uh, there's a lot of churn within our society, and there's all these various things which rub up against each other. Various ways of living, various ways of being, various ways of existing. Let's say. And then that and the cultural conflict that arises out of that is and man, whether it's man against society, whether it's man against man, it's a fascinating area to sort of get an insight into the society you live in.
Right,
I,
right. It's
I don't know if
interesting.
it makes sense, man, but yeah, that's kind of yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense, and it's interesting because I was just talking to another filmmaker who made a Marathi movie that kind of is noir as well. The background for that is essentially post-liberalization, so it's set in early '90s Pune, and he was saying the same thing. It's that that kind of political movement or an economic movement kind of sets two worlds apart, and that sets in motion a lot of other dynamics that you can use in your story. So that's kind of interesting. I think one of the reasons why Manorama 6 Feet Under is such a darling of many fans of noir is because it's a thoroughbred noir. It's classic noir in the sense that it's a film where it's often difficult to say who's good, who's bad. Most characters at some point are trying to reconcile with some piece of their reality. And one of the lines from the film almost spells that out, I thought, हर किसी की जिंदगी में एक ऐसा वक्त भी आता है जब साले आईने को सच बोलने की बीमारी लग जाती है. My question is, did you and co-writer Devika Bhagat always planned on structuring it as a classic noir, or was that something which shaped up along the way? I ask that because there are many ways to tell a same story, and I
Right.
think you guys chose the most interesting one.
Right. Yeah, no, it was very self-consciously noir in that sense, and yeah, the intent was right from the get-go to do a noir piece. I think we were both fairly naive. I wouldn't, self-consciously even pitch it today to a producer. But the first film, you're idealistic and you have really no sense of how the world really works. And we were very lucky that we actually got that film made. The circumstances of the film getting made also were interesting. But yeah, it was a very like sort of self-conscious attempt at doing a noir film. Also because I mean, say like the most underlying sort of premise of noir for me personally being the grayness of the characters. How sort of say morally complicit the lead character is to some degree. Morally compromised
Right.
and morally compromised and complicit in the system. So actually, so to speak. So we did approach it with okay, this is going to be like classic noir.
I see. I would love to ask you about the references and what kind of influences. So many see this film as an ode to Polanski's Chinatown, and there are several hat tips right from the beginning of the film. The film opens with a wide shot of a water tower. Of course, there is Karbanda's character, with strong parallels to Houston's character from Chinatown. And we also see Satyavir watching Chinatown, the film, sitting by his fish tank with goldfish.
Right.
And it was kind of cool because you chose this scene that playing is where Nicholson is threatened by Polanski. And he says, next time you lose the whole thing, cut it off and feed it to my goldfish.
Nice.
You're not a big Chinatown fan, are you? Just a wild guess.
I am. I mean, I'm a Chinatown fan. To be honest, I'm actually a big Polanski fan. That's politically controversial to say today, given all the legal stuff surrounding
Sure.
his sort of his Me Too movement in something stronger than that possibly. But yeah, I guess that's a whole separate discussion about the difference between the art and the artist. But yeah, big Polanski fan and a big noir fan for that matter. I think, to be honest, at the initial writing stages, it was a little bit subconscious. I mean, we knew we were going to make references to a lot of films. I think by the time we got down to a rough draft, we realized there was a lot of Chinatown in it. We probably removed some of that, and Yeah, so but then decided to run with it with all the Chinatown references, just making and I thought we made it fairly clear that we knew what's happening there. That wasn't an attempt to try and pass it off as our some of those thoughts or references as our own, which is why that
Right, right.
which is why that scene is there where he's watching Chinatown. So that's amply clear.
Right, right. And I was when I was researching, where you grew up and everything. So I take it you grew up in Delhi, right?
Yeah, kind of in Delhi. My dad was actually in the army, so we were this family. We get
Right.
posted every few years, so bunch of places. But every year, for some reason, by the time I was born, his every alternate posting was Delhi, and so yeah, that's where we kind of ended up for a
Right,
while.
right. And so, were you always a fan of the pulp fiction from Delhi Press magazines, like Manohar Kahania and all that? I have never read that, so I'm.
But I've dabbled with it. I mean, you always saw them, of course, at bus stands, and I mean, they're interesting. Really the format is more interesting than necessarily the content is. Uh,
Right.
very honestly, my Hindi reading speed is not that great, so I dabbled in those magazines, but the content isn't really actually that exciting. It's the format which is more sensational and exciting than really say the actual content in there.
Right, right, right. I haven't read either of those magazines, Satyakatha or Manohar Kahania, but I was guessing that probably even the name Manorama has something to do with Manohar Kahania or.
It was definitely. I mean, we tried to get the title also Manor Kanya, but we couldn't. So
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. I see. Okay.
it,
I see. I see. And I love the cast, right from Abhay Deol and Rama Sen to the driver of the cab with pink curtains. By
right.
the way, that wasn't Kamal Swaroop, was it?
No, it wasn't. He does look a lot like him, though. Now that
Okay. Who was that great actor?
while you were saying that, I was trying to remember his name, and it's a complete blank. He was just, one of those artists, those small
Okay.
character artists
Okay.
from Jaipur, possibly. He wasn't from Bombay. Uh,
Okay.
we were low budget film, so we had to get a lot of source a lot of smaller parts locally.
Right, right, makes sense. And we'll talk about that whole thing about that cab later on. But while we're on the cast, all just seem perfectly cast. But I wanted to ask you about a couple of specific casting decisions, and those are Sarika and Kulbhushan Kharbanda.
Right.
Uh, Sarika is so good in her cameo. She projected a mysterious woman so well. And how good was Kharbanda, I mean, who was nothing short of excellent again in projecting a certain quiet evil. What can you share with us about those two casting decisions?
So it's a. I'll be honest. It's been many years. I'm gonna have to try and remember some of these things. Also, because, like I said, we were discussing earlier, these muscles don't get exercised much in our industry in terms of actual discussions about
Right,
uh,
right.
stuff. But yeah. So Sarika, basically looking for somebody who was a little older, but still had, was still attractive, sexually attractive in a sense, and had a little bit of oomph. And Sarika was one of the first names that sort of jumped to mind. I think the other person that one, yeah, now I remember we did go and meet Manisha Koirala for it. I think she was possibly my very first choice for that.
I see.
She turned it down. I tried to explain to her that it might not be a big part, but still a central character, and of course also the eponymous character of the film in that sense. But yeah, she turned it down. I think Sarika ji was the second person we approached. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because growing up, I remember at one point in the shoot, Raima Sen's mother Moon Sen had dropped by for a few days. We were shooting in Rajasthan, and she was there, and Sarika was there at the same time. And I just mentioned to my assistant that both these women who were on my wall when I was a kid, both of them wearing bikinis actually. And it was kind of amusing to see that so many years later, one's in the same room with them. So that was Sarika. Kulji actually came on to the project very late. We'd already started shooting. I'd approached, I remember at that time, Naveen Nischal for the part. And Kulbhushan Khamrat, somehow I hadn't really thought of it.
I'm sorry, who was that? Who's
Naveen, Naveen Nischal,
Oh, David Mitchell. Yes, yes, yes.
we'd approached him for the part. So we were in discussions with him when we went off to actually location to start shooting. And then he kind of said no. And Kulji was a last minute thing. Yeah, I actually only never really met him before the shoot. I spoke to him on the phone, and he said yes, and he flew down, and that's when we first met and started discussing the part. So yeah, he came in very last minute.
I see, I see, and he was just excellent as always, as he is always. But because he has that certain projection that he doesn't give away a lot, but he does have a towering kind of a personality in some sense, And I thought that he fit in that character so well. I was kind of thinking to myself when my wife and I first saw the movie. By the way, we were blown away by it because both of us are noir fans, and we were thinking, who would be a good replacement for this character, and they were all good, and we kept on thinking about Kulbhushan Kharbanda, and the only person that we could think of was Farooq Sheikh, and we thought that he would have made a terrific.
Actually, I'm so happy you said that because you reminded me. Farooq Sheikh was my very first choice. Yeah. I'm so glad you actually reminded me of that because, in fact, that's the only time I actually met. I met him, and I chased him for a bit. Yeah, he was a little opposed to doing a negative role this late in his career, which is a similar problem I had with Deepti ji for NH10, trying to get her on board. She resisted it for a long time, wanting. She said, I don't want to do a negative role so late in my career. And Farooq Sheikh had the same problem, but he would have been excellent. And he was one of those actors I always wanted to work with. I think his loss is actually one of those great losses the film we've had.
Yes. And I'm so glad you were able to convince Deepti ji to do it.
But I'm so glad you actually, because it completely slipped my mind about the Farooq Sheikh part of for that casting.
And how did Abhay Deol get attached to the project?
Yeah, so that's another whole story. So initially, I was supposed to do this with Irrfan Khan, that is. And we started sort of prep with Irrfan, attached to it. Spent maybe a month and a half before that shut down. The funding kind of got withdrawn, let's call it, or so I knew Abhay that time. He was so I moved to Bombay in around 2001, and that's around when I met Abhay. He was one of the first few people we got along well, and we just there was this. He hadn't still done his film. He was shooting for Sochanath at that time, and he kept saying, "Let's do something together. Let's do something together." Somehow I thought he was a little too young for the part, and I had somebody a little more mature in my mind, which is what they like Irrfan, at that point of time. And then when the funding dried up a month later, 2 months later, I was still struggling, trying to figure out what to do next. He approached me and he said, look, he knew the Shimaru guys, and the Shimaru guys had approached him. And he said, Shimaru's got the money. They're ready to go with any story that that he's attached with. And let's do that one there. So he'd read the script, of course, and he'd always said he'd love to do it. And I'd been resisting it. So yeah, so basically I said, that I think I had two conditions. One was he'd need to grow a mustache, and two was that he'd need to spend some time in the sun and get a tan, and three, I guess they were not two, but three, that he'd have to spend just a little time roaming around the streets of Rajasthan with me, so that he could pick up on the local, I don't know, body language, whatever. There's a particular way of just even say buying bhaji, so that you can.
Right.
If you've lived in Bombay, you don't quite pick up those nuances otherwise.
And could you tell us why? What was the reason behind the mustache? It's just a character trait. Yeah.
Just make him look older. Abhay was very young at that point of time. I think this is 2006 when we were in pre-production. So yeah, that he didn't quite look like the typical father of a 4-year-old or whatever. And just to give him a little bit of age. And this is the time when actors would still resist, like things like growing a mustache or changing the look or, cutting the hair. So even this haircut we got done from a local barber in Rajasthan.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, and like I said, the whole cast is just brilliant, and Gul Panag in that nice role, and Raima Sen. I mean, what a revelation Raima Sen was in that role.
She's very good. She's a great natural actor. I think she's got great instincts. I was just saying she's a little underutilized by the industry. I think all of these people are underutilized by the industry, actually.
And of course, there's Nawaz, who just simply cannot, fail to impress. So
he's such an incredible actor. know, when Irrfan dropped out, one of my other choices was Nawaz. I was like trying to convince the producers that we should just make it with Nawaz, as the lead. At that time, of course, that was everyone thought I was joking, but
Yeah, that time Nawaz had not done any of the big films, right?
no, he had. So basically, I saw Nawaz in a short film called Bypass. Have you seen that? Irrfan.
Yes. Irfan Yen. Yeah. Fabulous one. Yeah.
Great film, and they both blew me away. And really, really great film. I mean, Amit Kumar. I think I met Amit. I don't know him very well, but I bumped into him a few times. And the first time I met him, I told him he was actually more than Chinatown. He was my inspiration for Manorama with the Bypass in that sense. Such a great film.
Right. Yes. And who was Nawaz's partner in crime? The other guy with him.
Jogi Ji. Jogi Ji is he's an actor and largely a casting director here, and so he was also the casting director for Manorama.
Okay. I couldn't place him, but I have seen that that face was kind of very familiar.
He plays a lot of small roles in films. He'll always find one for himself in the films he does the casting for. He's a familiar face. You'll see him in a lot of Srijit Sarkar's films. He'll pop up as a little cameo or a small part here and there.
And now let's talk about that cab with pink curtains. what's the deal with that? Honestly, I couldn't make out what that was. And that fabulous actor. And so we see that guy picking up Abhay Deol a few times. And every time it's essentially he has had a brush with death or, some bad thing. And so is he supposed to be, some kind of a savior or something?
So anyway, so I think that was one of Devika's great contributions in the script, where she was like, she just loved that character and she wanted him there. It was around, there was a little phase in my life where I was really like sort of playing, just loved the whole nature of, say, surrealism or, having these little surreal moments in films. And it seemed to work. So my own explanation for it was work backwards, I'll be honest. From just wanting that character there, was that in some sense, and this is going to sound comically sort of academic almost, but like I said, it was a backward reverse fit for my own, I guess, peace of mind. Was that he's in Greek mythology, I forget the name of that guy who sort of takes you across the river, when you die, to Hades or the Greek underworld. I think his name is Charion or something like that. He takes you across the river in a boat, and the river Styx or something. In my mind, he was that guy. And if you really go with that explanation, then in the end, in that sense, Abhay Deol is actually probably dead, because this is where he takes him, and his wife and child are also possibly dead. But that's a dark.
Very interesting. So you're talking about Chiron from Greek mythology?
Yeah, but something like that.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Okay. I see. Yeah, that guy was brilliant. And like I said, I kept on thinking it was Kamal Swarup, but then I thought, he wouldn't do such a small part, but he looked like that guy.
That's a great idea to, give Kamal Swarup a cameo in some film sometime. That's it.
And I always like to spot the references to classics or older films. And this film does seem to have a lot of Easter egg references. And we already talked about Chinatown, the hat tips to Chinatown. But I was also able to spot a little bit of Antonioni's Blow Up, where Satyavir kind of spots the girl in the photo, at a later stage. There's a little bit of Lynch with Blue Velvet in the opening sequence with the suggestion that unsavory things that lie beneath the surface, kind of unbeknown to us. Were there any other direct references in the film? I would love to hear them.
Yeah, so I think some of these things were a mix of references, in the sense that opening sequences, of course, it's David Lynch with that ear lying on the ground or whatever, with the camera tracking past, or with a little bit of the Wild Bunch mixed in with the opening with the little kids burning some.
Right.
Scorpions in the beginning or something. I think it was Scorpions. Little bits here and there. The Himanshu at that point in time, like, for your first film, you're not sure if it's going to be your last film. Also, you try and throw in all these little things that you've loved and you've been influenced by, and you just want to make it as personal as possible in that sense. There was a reference, I think, to Brazil, the Terry Gilliam film. which was just there's a little scene where Abhay Deol goes to this trucking yard to find out the driver. We meet this driver whose truck ran over the Manorama character.
Right.
And the truck driver's name is in the I think I remember this now, is Sham Lahiri, and the character in Brazil is called Sam Lowry. And
awesome. Okay.
So this guy, there's this voice calling out Sam Lowry, and so we had our characters calling out Sham Lahiri as he's walking, trying to find him. Again, that was a little extra hidden Easter egg about Brazil there. But yeah, I think there were a whole bunch of different things there.
I see. And what films in specific did you and Devika kind of pour over, or some books before making this as part of your, process? Were there any specific films, books besides Chinatown?
No, so we didn't actually even watch Chinatown together. It was really just that, okay, let's not actually watch them right now, because then everything becomes very consciously, okay,
right.
Rather than having stuff that's already filtered in your memory, and the stuff that stays is the stuff that's, important, I believe. Sometimes it's better to approach it that way. Just, let your 10-year-old viewing, you're not trying to faithfully reproduce it or whatever. Let it be filtered by your own, experiences since you watched that film.
And any other films which you referred to, or any other films that you kind of watched again, or something for to get in the feel for noir?
Not really. I mean, so the referencing, of course, there was in that sense that we addressed films we'd seen in the past and that
right.
we were with. But yeah, there was also Kiss Me Deadly. I mean, there's that whole little plot.
Oh yeah,
Kiss Me.
Aldrich, yeah,
which was there, of course, referenced in Manorama again. Yeah, it was a bit of pastiche that way. Bit of this, bit of that.
Gotcha. Let's talk about your latest film now. And, I also want to talk about NH10, but I want to make sure that we talk about Laal Kaptaan first, because I absolutely love this film.
You actually managed to watch that one?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I loved it.
Yeah.
And, it's an absolute travesty that not too many people have watched this film. And I actually tweeted about it, and I'm going to... when I announced this particular episode, I'm gonna just retweet that again, because I really think this is, in my opinion, this is your best film. This is just my opinion. As a member of audience, I thought this was your best film.
It is the most work for sure. It is like
yes. It shows. First of all, it beautifully combines the most American of genres. That is the Western, with this very rustic setting of Bundelkhand. And it's also a very well-researched film, craftily blending, the history of the region with the plot. The region where you decided to set this movie has such a fascinating history, and I knew very little about it when I watched the movie. But I read up afterwards, after watching the movie, and it's just absolutely fascinating. And I'm fairly versed in the Maratha history, the Peshwa's history, but I had no idea about some of the nuggets which kind of connect with Bundelkhand's local history with that history. So it was an absolute revelation for me. Were you always well versed with the history of this region, and that's why you thought, hey, it would be interesting to write a story set there during that particular period? Or did you have a basic germ of a story about betrayal, revenge, and you thought that setting it in 18th century Bundelkhand would be, was an afterthought, essentially?
No, so, I mean, yeah. So let's see. I've always been a bit of a history buff. Even growing up, loved history was probably one of my favorite sort of subjects. I mean, it's not taught very well in schools, unfortunately, I feel, but even with the badly written history, that it somehow seemed always very evocative, full of images, and so many of these old monuments you find scattered around in India. And once you start getting a little bit of a context for them, they start speaking. You can't drive down past the old fort. Once you know what a little bit of its history, it suddenly becomes that much more evocative, and you can, so yeah, I've always been a history buff, but frankly, I mean, I think I really started getting into history. So I studied in the US for a while and worked there for a while. So within the sort of like American public library system, suddenly found a lot of like really old books. I mean, which addressed parts of Indian history which I wasn't really aware of, which was the sort of, especially the sort of the period between the Mughals I mean, post Aurangzeb's dying and till the establishment of the British Raj, that sort of almost 100-year period, which was the Maratha period in some sense, the, the, the time of Maratha expansion. And just a really fascinating period once you start reading about it, because there's just so much detail, and that William Dalrymple just done a book about that period, I think, called The Anarchy, which I still haven't read. I wish it would have been a possible, great reference for exactly that period, because most of the stuff so the taste for that, I think, for that period came from that exposure in the, like I said, weirdly enough, in the American public library system, because I didn't know about the existence of, like, say, but a lot of these books are now in the public domain, and you can find them on archive.org. And there's a bunch of different other things, and there's really great primary sources and things like that, which are just which have real interesting, say, like, nuggets of information. I mean, so even the Gosai character, I really heard about the Naga Gosais the first time when I was reading a book about this guy called, I think his name is Samru. Have you heard of Samru? I think his first name was Walter Reinhardt, but he was known as Samru in India. Begum Samru was his wife. And
yes, I've heard of. I'm not too familiar with the story. I have definitely heard of it.
Yeah, so there's this. It's the time when there are all these European adventurers running around in India, so I was reading this book about him, and there was like maybe a couple of lines reference about the Battle of Buxar and the fact that the Naga Gosais had fought in it. And then I started trying to figure out more about the Nagas and their history, because the way sadhus are understood today or portrayed today is probably quite different from the way they were certainly in that period of time, where they tended to be much more of a sort of mercenary group, which was in it for political power, but then we'll have to get into the whole history of sadhudom in India, and the sense of that a lot of, like, say, mystics who we think that they're probably just obsessed with moksha or something, but there's always been a underlying current of temporal power through tyag or whatever, so you get spiritual powers which you then use for temporal gain. So that aspects of the whole sort of the Naga history was really stumbled upon, and then it's a very deep and rich vein with lots of fascinating events and peoples, but yeah, that's kind of basically where one came from. In terms of the actual plot, there was a little plot that Deepak Venkatesh and I had been sort of discussing for many years, and we hadn't been able to find a real context for it. So we thought of whether it's set in modern times, maybe it's in some sort of Naxal-infested area. There's this guy, he's trying to take revenge. It somehow never sat properly. We just never could find a context for it. And then suddenly one day it was like, hey, what about this? Let's do this as a period piece, which is set with this guy and this Naga Gosai, which I'd just been reading about separately as a separate interest. And it was just a weird combination of those two things.
Yeah, you guys did a fabulous job of blending that in, because obviously it's a fictional story, but the historical details and accuracy of it makes it feel so real. How about references for this particular film? Because this is like it's a screaming western. If you look at it from one point of view, were there any particular westerns which you used as a reference for your DOP or your ADs for this particular film?
Right. I would say really the spaghetti western, Sergio Leone, of course, in particular, the Dollar series, or the Good, Bad, the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West,
yes,
and the other spaghetti guys, but Leone in particular.
I see. And speaking of Leone, I thought the dynamic between Rahmat Khan and Gosai kind of reminds one of Once Upon a Time in the West, in the sense that I thought, here Harmonika's elder brother and Frank are the same person, with Gosai as Harmonika and Rahmat Khan as Frank. And I don't know if I'm just reading that, or is that something that you tried to kind of subvert into the film?
Frankly, Himanshu, not consciously. I might have. I mean, yeah, a lot of these things. I mean, I do believe the subconscious does work in strong ways.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think consciously, but yeah, it's an absolutely valid point. He is Harmonika, and that the brother is the the other guy.
And it just happens to be that his brother and Frank are the same person. Huh?
Yeah.
Can you talk about the cinematography of this particular film? Because I thought that was also brilliant. And, I wish I could watch this film on the big screen here, but it never released in the Bay Area. So I never got to watch it.
He's pretty much anywhere. But yeah, the cinematography is Shankar Raman, outstanding cinematographer, fantastic work. Uh, he's directed a few films as well. He's directed one film actually, Gurgaon.
Yes, yes.
Which is again a great
film. I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, kind of consciously, subconsciously noirish. So yeah, Shankar and I did a whole bunch of recce's together. At one point in time, there was this pressure. It's very difficult shooting in the boondocks of India in terms of infrastructure.
Sure.
One of the reasons I keep ending up in Rajasthan is that even in the boondocks there will be some palace hotel where you can keep the stars, so that they're not complaining about staying at Hotel Alankar opposite bus station, Jhansi or whatever. So that's one of the advantages. In Rajasthan, there are all these little sort of boutique hotels in the middle of nowhere. They've got that infrastructure in place at least, so you can keep your principal stars there. But yeah, so we did a whole bunch of recce, and so there's always this pressure: why don't you just shoot it abroad somewhere, and you'll get fancier landscapes and stuff. But I wanted that very sort of earthy, desi. You can recognize an Indian landscape. It's the foliage. It's the
oh yes, and it feels magical because within the context of the Western, it just feels magical.
Right. So going to Mongolia and shooting that, great, spectacular landscapes and all, but they're not they're Indian landscapes. And they don't smell, they don't have that matti ki khushbu or whatever, So, so it was, he was up to the challenge. Because a lot of people would have balked at these really difficult shooting conditions and trying to make the image look halfway good. But yeah, and we sort of like discussed, of course, the visual language that one had in mind. And there was a lot of discussions on that. And, he did a fabulous job, I think.
Right. And may I ask you, so what kind of discussion was that in terms of the visual palette, and what did you want to paint it like?
Some of the things, of course, the fact that you're shooting these large landscapes, so there's this wide lens extensive use of wide lenses that sort of make sort of diminishing the character in contrast to the landscapes, so the landscapes dominate it at most times. Comes back to that sense of man versus nature in some sense, and also using, of course, very Sergio Leone low angle cameras, these things. In fact, Shankar at some point complained, man, that if he never ever shoots a low angle shot again, he'd be more than happy, in his life.
Yeah, the film has fabulous low-angle shots, and it actually kind of reminded me. Yes, of course, Leone, and I think Leone essentially gets it from John Ford. So it kind of reminded me of a lot of the old, really old Western classics, and it was just fabulous.
So in that sense, just trying to figure out, say, a palette of lenses, the overall larger, dustier color palettes for the film, and which of course extends into the costumes and everything. As Shankar says, he can only be as good as the costume and art department are. So, and in some sense, because that's what you're working with in terms of what are you going to like is being provided by those guys, and unless of course it's the landscapes. But yeah, he did a fabulous job, and I think all those elements came together really well.
Right. All right, let's talk about NH10, another great movie. And circling back to what you said about Deepti Naval, because I think that character is one of the most crucial characters and one of the most fascinating characters from that film. Like we said, talked about it earlier, that this film is essentially, a fight of a woman against the entire system of patriarchy. And ironically, she's doing that to save her husband. Deepti Naval comes across as a strong, staunch woman who's essentially part of this patriarchy, if you will, because she's kind of one of the custodians who's, keeping it intact and upholding that. So that character was very interesting. My question to you is, how did you convince Deepti ji, and what was was you and your writer's intent behind writing this particular character to show that there are a lot of women who are actually upholding this entire wild system of patriarchy?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, so I mean, it was a very obviously conscious attempt to say that some women are, complicit in the system. I mean, and that's just human nature. I mean, we sort of
Right.
adjust, adapt, and it's not to say that anyone is more guilty than the other in that sense, but that's how people are. We sort of make the best of any situation you can, and you get immersed in that in the mythology of that system, so to speak, where and yeah, and you see that in families where the mother-in-law might be cruel to the daughter-in-law, who then becomes a mother-in-law, and the sort of violence perpetuates and goes down generations, and that happens to men, of course. Also, there's this sort of violence that is perpetuated and is passed along, and you know, it's a sort of disturbing cultural phenomena. But yeah, so she was a conscious attempt, so that so it didn't paint it out as that, hey, all men are bad, and look, they're just while all women are sort of because I think it's patronizing to sort of make women into sort of weak victims always. They can be complicit in the system. They're humans. They have the same desires and needs, wants, psychological issues as anyone else. In that sense, so it's to sort of not treat them as full-blown adults is patronizing and I think offensive in that sense.
Right.
Yeah, so in a sense, she was a response to that. The character was a response to that. In terms of Deepti ji, I don't know. I just wanted her, yeah, right from the top. It was just that she would just have the sort of right amount of initial like kindliness, but also have that internal steel. And really didn't think of anyone else. So we pursued her like crazy. The EP on the film, the executive producer, Deepa Motwane, who's actually Vikram Motwane's mom, also knew her. So we used her a lot to keep pressurizing her to say yes. And she eventually did. But yeah, she was reluctant. She didn't want to play a villain, as she said, and she said, the young generation will just remember me for slapping Anushka Sharma. This is how they'll think. And it took a little convincing even on set and all. So it's weird because I recently bumped into her, meaning a few months ago. And I was reminding her that I've not met her again after a few years. Reminding her that while we were shooting for the film, she didn't have a particularly great experience, I think. And that's what I was telling her, that, she was resistant to having to slap Anushka or push her, or just keep having to force her that you have to do it. You read the script, we talked about it. Now you can't bail out at the last minute while we're standing on set. But she did a good. Yeah, I think she really makes that character happen. Yeah.
Oh yes, I loved her, and of course, Deepti Naval and Kulbhushan Karwanda and Farooq Sheikh. They're all legends, with their early work in the '70s and everything. But the roles which I've really loved in their second innings was, for example, when we are talking about Deepti Naval, is this one from NH10, and the other one was from a film called Aurangzeb by Atul Sabharwal, where she plays Rishi Kapoor's wife. Have you seen that film?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I love that film, and I thought her role in that particular film, has a lot of gray shades as well. And I thought that was one of her best performances in her second innings too. And just the same thing with Farooq Sheikh. I mean, I wish he had done this film too. But how cool was he in Shanghai? You know,
I,
so it's really great to see these actors, do these kind of gray roles in their second innings.
Such a joy to work with the older lot of actors with just sheer experience they bring to it, and just
Right.
even in terms of technique. I mean, forget the art of it. Just in terms of hitting the marks and getting the light right, and just tilting the head enough so that the light gets them. I mean, cameramen love working with old school actors because they just know how to stand and look good in a particular spot and manage to get the light correctly on their
Right.
face. Stuff like that. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's like a master class in motion.
Absolutely. I mean, when we Sarika, I mean, for instance, she was phenomenal at it. She just knew exactly where to stop and where to, without ever having to look down to see if there's a mark there or something, which a lot of the newer actors sometimes struggle with. It's difficult to give a great performance while still hitting your lights and your marks, and there's a mechanical aspect to the performance as well, which needs to be sorted.
Right, right. And that's a very small role, but that's, I think, the trickiest role of the film.
Yeah, yeah,
It's it demands a lot, and she did a fabulous job of it.
yeah. That's right.
So, how about in terms of getting NH10 made, Navdeep? I know there was a lot of. I was trying to. I googled some of the reviews and everything, and they were all mostly positive reviews. A lot of people had quite a few things to say about the violence in the film, and I think I read somewhere that this was your statement, I believe, and you said that you guys consciously made an effort to not show blood, right? And so the violence was there, but you guys tried to steer away from quote unquote gore, in
Right.
terms of showing the blood and everything. Like my question to you is that you did that because you thought that the audiences were not ready for that kind of stuff, or because I would have loved to see the whole shebang. I mean, because it makes it more gritty, it makes it more real, and if you're going to be hitting people with crowbars and everything, there's going to be blood.
No, so I don't think we purposely shied away from the blood as such. I don't know. I don't remember that statement. So yeah. So Himanshu, the way we sort of structured the violence in that, in a sense, was that so the scene where the sister and her husband are murdered, and the honor killing itself. That one was for me was always going to be the most sort of gory and violent, and so that you set up an expectation of violence, which then carries through for the rest of the film. So even if it never does ever get that violent again, the fear of it reaching there is always there. That, oh shit, I hope she doesn't now get beaten up to that level. So there's always the threat. If they're going to, here's this bunch of people who, if they could do that to their sister, what will they do to these people? So that threat needed to loom large, and that violence always needed to be ugly in that sense. It needed to be repulsive, and that was the aim. So yeah, I think violence is an emotional tool, like anything else. You're using it for a certain purpose, and the main purpose in this film for me was it needed to evoke some degree of disgust, so to speak. And actually, gore would have helped. It's difficult to get. We had to cut a little bit of violence out of the film, regardless, even with an adult certification. The censor board in India is a little weird about what they'll allow and what they won't allow. So they'll allow, say, a decapitation in Bahubali for some reason. Maybe it's pictured, of course, a little more. I wouldn't call it comic booky, but yeah, maybe comic booky. I mean, Tom and Jerry cartoon violence doesn't seem to affect anyone. Jerry will always bounce back after getting run over with a road roller. But yeah, this violence needed to be, in that sense, a little disturbing.
Right.
So because in real life, violence is disturbing. I mean, Himanshu, you see somebody just getting slapped.
Yes.
It's slapped, and it's like, it's disturbing.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Nadeep, you have made 3 genre films. As it is, it's very difficult to make genre films, especially in India. And you started out with a genre film as well. What's the trick for young filmmakers who are trying to get a genre film made? What's the trick?
Lying helps.
Sure. Yeah, you got to hustle. You got to lie. What else did you do?
Tell them it's a genre film. Like I said, so with Manorama, it was very, we were telling them it's a genre film, noir film. That's what we were telling Shimaru. And somehow they just wanted to make a film with Abhay. They didn't really care what we had in the story and the script. So we made it. In NH10, I think it was, the producers were smart. So Anurag and Vikram were cool with that. If they were happy that we went with like whatever we were trying to do, a slap last girl type thing. with Lal Kaptaan again, it was a bit of lying here and there and not really stressing too much about the Western. Um, and then, then doing that anyway, So yeah, I think you have to bullshit a little. You have to lie a little. That's unfortunately the truth of any industry. I suppose our industry more than any other. But yeah, it also requires a lot of persistence, Imanshu. I mean, just it's sometimes easier
Right.
to just do something else and make something else. But
Right.
genre filmmaking just seems to be my thing, and that's something I keep persisting with. I mean, yeah, there's been films in between which haven't happened, lots of them. I mean,
Right.
which started and stopped, or went into pre-production and then stalled. So yeah, there's long gaps between my filmography, but it's worth it. Yeah, it's what you want out of life.
Oh, yes. You made three very strong films. Do you think Laal Kaptaan was your third film? So, you already had two great films which you had done before to show to the world. But do you think a film like Laal Kaptaan would have been made if, like a star like Saif was not attached to it?
I was amazed when even with Saif attached, it got made because I mean, Saif's not at the peak of his popularity, so to speak. Great actor, either he's matured like amazingly, and he's become, I think, possibly post Omkara is his best performance period. But yeah, commercially not that viable, so it was fantastic that it got made at all. He was bang on perfect for the role, at least in my eyes. But yeah, it was a very difficult pitch, and just yeah, I was surprised it actually got made.
I see. So your advice to young kids who are trying to get a genre film made is just be persistent, just hustle.
So
There is no formula to it, right?
and don't stress the genre aspect of it too much. Just yeah.
But how do you do that, Navdeep? Because nowadays, I mean, it's not like old producers, right? These are people who have seen a lot of films and they're much more film literate. And
It's interesting, Himanshu, because I mean, you can look at a script and not really be able to tell. I mean, if you looked at the Raal Kaptan script, it could have been done like a Chinese action movie. If you want
Hmm,
to, it could have
right,
been
right,
it could have been done as a Chinese period film or whatever. I mean, you could have been, it didn't necessarily need to be a Western in that sense. It
right.
could have been a very different take on it. So, yeah, just don't talk too much about your
I see.
take.
I see. So your advice is to actually downplay the genre bit part of it.
Yeah, that's something I think producers possibly do get slightly uncomfortable with. They want to try and we don't really have a great history of genre filmmaking. I mean,
Right.
say the period before the 70s had, of course, was a little less, let's say, masala. For me, masala being that the thali approach, that you have a comedy track and a music track, of course, and you have like the band ka track and the best friend ka track, and there's all these various elements which are so that everyone is served something that they like. Uh, but that seemed to be the approach. But I think yeah, the larger cinemas also now started. I mean, maybe not particular genres, but we sort of created our own genres. And there's the Indian youth film, and there's the Indian stalker lover film, and we have our own genres in a sense, so which have become more defined post say the 2000s.
And finally, what can you share with us about your future projects?
So
Is Canada still in the works?
uh, it's on the back burner as of right now. It's a difficult film to cast. And again, being a gangster drama genre, gangster drama. I mean, everyone loves the script. Whoever reads it, including the actors, just difficult coordinating a number of faces together.
Is that film set in present day, or that's a period film too?
It's period in the sense it's yeah. I mean, it's a recent period. It's the
Okay.
turn of the millennium. 99 2000 that period. When the Canadian gangs were hyperactive and those. So the Punjabi Canadian gangs were well defined then. I think they've become much more international now in terms of the way they operate. In terms of the ethnic constitution isn't as Punjabi anymore. Or
Right.
I think yeah, this gangster scene has changed a bit in Canada the intervening years. Not too current on the current situation there in Canada in terms of the gangster stuff.
Right. And what else are you working on right now?
So there's a couple of things. There's an OTT show that one is developing. It's a noirish thing.
Oh,
And
fabulous. Okay.
that was supposed to go on the floors end of the year. Now with this whole Corona thing, and I don't know what the hell's going to happen. The whole industry is in flux.
Right.
And yeah, let's see how things pan out. And there's a feature film that, sort of, again, a female lead uh, centered uh, movie, uh, again, set for sometime next year.
I see. I see. You're not attached to the new Amazon show by any chance, right? I might be mistaken. Patal
Uh,
Lok?
Look, no, a whole bunch of friends. Yeah, I think they credited me with a script consultant on it.
Oh, that's
Uh,
right. Yeah, because I remember reading your name somewhere. It's written by Sudeep Sharma, right?
Written by Sudeep. I was involved in the early development stages, and then I got busy with Laal Kaptaan, so I once
Okay.
it, so once we got it past the whole development stuff, I was out. So I was involved with the development of it.
I see. Well, that's awesome, Nodeep. Again, thanks so much for chatting with us.
Yes,
Like I said, I really like all of your films and really glad we got an opportunity to chat.
so
And I
much.
look forward to your next. Hey, thanks a lot, Nodeep. Thank you so much.
It's a very much a pleasure, man. Thanks.
That was my chat with Navdeep Singh. If you liked the episode, do spread the word. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, do drop us a review when you get a chance. You can follow me on Twitter at Love of Cinema SF8 for podcast related updates and my tweets on all things movies. That's the episode. Hope you liked it. This is Himanshu signing off, and like always, thank you for listening to the Love of Cinema podcast.